All right, let's get serious about today's topics. First thing we're going to do is talk about fires from the 2015 summer season. My guest today is Chief Lonnie Click. He is the chief of the Benton Fire District Number 1. And if you are a regular on the show as a listener, then you remember that we had the chief on before, kind of in the middle of the season, talking about what was going on. He provided a lot of interesting insights at that point. So Lonnie, you're on the, we expect the same of you today.
Thank you, Christina. Glad to be back.
All right. Okay, first of all, looking at this summer season of 2015, how would you characterize it? I mean, if you, I gave you 3 options: average season, a bad season, and worst on record.
You know, really, in the last 3 years, we've had some really bad seasons, and every year we come into a new year and we say, oh, this was worse. So, you know, any fire season's a bad fire season. The state of Washington, on record this year, you know, had more acres burned and more fires than they've ever had before. So, you know, if you want to look at it on a graded scale, that's where we're at. This is the worst fire season on record in Washington State.
Uh-oh. Okay, that doesn't sound good. What else, what can you tell us about it? Tell us some of the particulars, like houses destroyed. What do you have on that?
You know, there were a fair amount of residences that were lost this year. You know, but it really wasn't anything different than it was last year. As we had, you know, some fairly significant property losses last year up in the Okanagan range also, as we did this year. So, you know, we're getting, as years continue to go by, we're seeing more structures burned on a regular basis. People are building homes in the interface area, you know, in the timber, in the grass, in those places that are becoming more representative to wildland fire as we continue to go into a climate change period that is very, very susceptible to large catastrophic burns. Wow.
Okay. So, what were our most frequent causes? I mean, I know we've heard about lightning strikes in the past.
But you know, we had a fair amount of human-caused fires this year, but really the lightning-caused fires were the most devastating and the most destructive. And a lot of that's due to the location that ignition occurs. A lot of the human-caused fires, you know, they're caused where you can get people to. Where the lightning-caused fires, they are where you may not be able to put firefighters and resources to deal with them. So by the time they get to a location that you can work with them, they're so big and have so much energy, it's a lot harder to handle. You know, some of the stuff that took place this year was, you know, weather and fuel drove a lot of it. So they happened on really bad weather days, lightning fires with really dry fuels, and the fires grew really fast, really rapidly. As we already had, you know, a significant amount of resources committed to fire on the landscape already. So then we were having to redeploy, reassign, move stuff around based on new risks and values that were being threatened by new fires, you know, that had started in subsequent storms.
Mm-hmm. Well, it seems like we also had wind this year. Maybe we've had it in the past, but boy, sure noticed it this year. You just take a look at the Wenatchee fire and how that swept through.
So the North Cascades is a phenomenon all on its own, and you know, when we go up there all the time to fight fire, from, you know, Ellensburg up to the Canadian border, and there's a significant wind pattern in all those valleys up there on a regular basis, but you just don't know when it's going to occur. It's not really predictable, other than you know, it can happen and it can come with a vengeance, and a lot of times, you know, you're looking at winds 30 to 40 miles an hour down drainage, and if you get down drainage winds in the North Cascades up in the Okanagan valleys, that's where all your properties are. All your cities and towns are down there on the edge of the Columbia River, you know, and the Okanagan River's down there at the bottom of the valleys where the fires start, you know, up in the hills, and they blow right towards the towns, and that's what ends up happening with 40-mile-an-hour wind. It blows them right down into the communities.
What were some of those unique firefighting challenges this year? I mean, you talked about obviously the wind, having fires up in the upper ranges where it's extremely difficult to get to. What else?
So I think you know the biggest thing that we saw in the fire environment this year was a change in fire behavior, and fire's not behaving like it has in the past. It's a lot more extreme fire behavior. Things are burning a lot more readily, more intense, and then our season started really, really early. So by the time we made it the middle to the end of July and really getting into the heart of fire season in August, the folks were tired already. They had worked, you know, for 2 and 3 months, day after day after day, fighting wildland fire, and now we're in the heart of wildland fire season, and so we're running out of resources. And you know, we brought a lot of resources in from Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and some of those places, you know, to assist us this year.
Wow.
And it's been, you know, 3 or 4 years since we've had those folks helping us up here in the Northwest. So it is a sign of where we were. And then it continued to go. The fire season wouldn't stop. The Department of Natural Resources, Washington State, was still flying air support on wildland fires the middle of October. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, and that's just unheard of, you know, fire seasons from May to October.
That does not sound good. We're going to take a break here, Lonnie, but when we come back, I want to talk about Tri-Cities resources that were used to fight fires around the Northwest, and also what you learned that you think might be applied 2016. We're back in a moment here on Meet in the Middle.
Is that me?
Yeah, my guest today is Chief Lonnie Click, and he's the fire chief for Benton Fire District number 1, and we're reflecting on the 2015 summer fire season. Lonnie, you just told me that at one time we had nearly almost 12,000 firefighters working Northwest fires at one time. Well, there is no one group that has 12,000 firefighters, so I'm assuming there has to be a lot of help, mutual aid given. What kind of resources did we offer up from the Tri-Cities?
So we sent multiple engine strike teams out all summer long, starting at the end of June, well into the end of September. And a strike team is 3 to 4 engines, water tender support, and then miscellaneous overhead to manage those resources. We sent strike teams out to 18 different large fires in the state. So there was a significant amount of folks gone helping actually fight the fire, and then we have multiple overhead in the Tri-Cities that actually work on incident management teams that were scattered all over the Northwest and assisting in managing and organizing the firefighting efforts on the ground. So there was between all the agencies here in the basin, there was a lot of involvement of the fire agencies local here to go out and help in northeast Washington above Spokane, the North Cascades and Wenatchee and above. Down around Goldendale we sent resources. We had some folks in Oregon. So they were running all over, and we were out there helping, you know, everybody in the country that came in here to help us this year in the Northwest.
Well, my first question has to be then, who pays for all that? I mean, are we as local taxpayers paying that, or what?
So when we send our resources out, of course we have to pay our folks their wage, and then the whoever the host agency is or the landowner that owns the fire then compensates the agency that sends the resources. So if it's a Forest Service fire, then the Forest Service reimburses us for our expenses that we incur in assisting them on a fire. If it's another fire district, we have the Washington State Mobilization Plan, where the Washington State Patrol, the state government reimburses us for our expenses that we incur on a fire of another jurisdiction that's not within our mutual aid agreement.
Yeah, so it's coming out of a different pocket on our pants. We're still paying for it.
Yeah,
Yes,
it's
obviously.
still,
Yeah.
you know, it's still U.S. citizen, state of Washington, taxpayer money, you know, whether it be at the federal government level, whether it be at the state or county level, you know, we're still all paying for the effort that goes on nationally, you know, to fight wildland fire.
Mhm. Well, it's an excellent example, I guess, of how you can mobilize resources in one particular area to help in fighting fires. I mean, I can't imagine how otherwise you would do it. You certainly wouldn't want untrained people out there trying to fight a fire.
No, you can't do that. You can't send untrained people out there. We bring the National Guard in and the military every year, you know, and help us out fighting fire. And they have new members in their folks, and we have to give them a training class. So they'll come to an incident camp, and they'll get 3 or 4 days worth of training, and then we'll put them out on the line to help us fight fire. Because you can't send somebody out there that's not trained and qualified, or they just gonna get hurt.
Yeah, but even with training, we did lose some people this year.
Yes, we were unfortunate, you know, and we saw 3 fatalities up there on the Twitch River fire, and you know, it all comes back to home, and you know, we can't control what Mother Nature does, so we have to do the best that we can, and rely on our decision-making processes and the things we've learned over the years to make the best decisions that we can to try to avoid those situations. But sometimes, you know, catastrophe does occur.
Mm-hmm. All right, so this has been escalating in the past, what, 5 years, the past decade? What's the timeline on that, and what have we learned that we can apply to coming years?
You know, so what we're seeing in the fire management world is that there is, you know, we're going through climate change, or we're in climate change right now in the Northwest. Warmer, drier seasons, not as much moisture in the fall and winter and the spring, and fires becoming, you know, more prevalent on the landscape in both Washington and Oregon. And getting into the structural environment as what California's been exposed to for years. We all read the paper and see what happens to them on an annual basis, or down in New Mexico or Arizona. Well, we're experiencing that here now in the Northwest, and you know, for people to spend some time making their properties fire safe. You know, there's a lot of resources out there to help them clean up around their place, to make their places a little bit more resistant to fire, and you know, so there's not so much damage if fire does occur. But there's one thing that we don't have any control of, and that is Mother Nature and where our climate is today. You know, history shows that we're very possibly in a 100-year cycle, and if we look back 100 years ago into the late 1800s, the early 1900s, this is the kind of fire that was on the landscape on a regular basis. But they didn't have the firefighting resources at that time, mm-hmm. So the fires got very large. And that went on for, you know, a 20 to a 30-year period. So well into, you know, the 1930s, they were having large catastrophic fires in Washington and Oregon, you know. So if we're in that era where the climate is going to be this dry thing, you know, for the next 10 or 15 years, you know, our biggest concern is the west side of the Cascades, where it's all forest, it's all timber, and it's all populated. And if we continue to dry, they're in a drying trend also, and that's where, you know, we have a huge exposure to the communities and the population.
Mm-hmm. Well, interesting though, we didn't have that many grassland fires that were right here close to the Tri-Cities, did we? I mean, that seemed like this was like a pretty average year, I thought.
Locally, it was a very average year. We had some large fires to the west of us, Goldendale, Mapton,
mm-hmm.
Klickitat County area, the Columbia Gorge. We burned quite a few acres, about 70,000 down in that country, right around the 97, 82, Highway 14 corridor. some pretty good fires. But actually right here, you know, in the Tri-City areas, we had a fairly mild, you know, normal wildland fire season. We did have a large fire in Walla Walla County that we helped support early in the summer in the Blue Creek. And then we had another one down at Waldoga Gap that we helped support later in the season. That was a fairly large fire, I don't know, 12,000 acres. But, you know, for the most part, we did fairly well here in the grass.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that we talked about as we even planned this opportunity for you to come and share this information with us is how the dryness in the soil is affecting us here in the Tri-Cities. So we may not have the fires, but we've got something else.
You got dust, and then we have significant crashes, mass car pileups. We just experienced a couple of those. I think they were now 3 or 4 weeks ago, early October, mid-October, up towards Prosser, and then up on top of the Horse Heaven Hills where they had, you know, 20, 30 car pileups. We actually had a fatality in one. So, you know, with the dryness of the soil, then the soil moves and we get a lot of dust. So now we're exposed to the, you know, the dust storms that they're used to in Texas because they're dry. And so we got to really be aware of all those things.
What are we going to do about that, though? It seems that we need a better system for shutting down the roads.
You know, the state put in a pretty good system about shutting down the roads. They got billboards all over the state highways that say, you know, dust over the road and don't stop. And then if it does get closed, they'll put it up on the billboard. I think that the system is there. What happens is these things occur so rapidly that the human doesn't react as fast as the Mother Nature reacts.
Yeah, those are devastating. So we're into a new normal, and you think that unless something significant happens over the winter, that we're going to see more dust storms and more major catastrophic forest fires?
I would say, yeah, if we don't have a considerable amount of moisture, you know, carried on through winter into spring, that we can pretty much count on that we'll be right in the same boat next year that we're in this year, with a significant amount of wildland fire on the landscape and a lot of dust movement. There is, you know, there's some stuff going on in the legislature in the state, and the Commissioner of Land is trying to get some additional money for some additional firefighters, and I know that the federal agencies are doing some things to try to put some more folks on staff. So there are people doing things to try to help make a difference into the future, but that's all
to fight fires, but they can't
yeah.
They can't make rain.
No, they can't make rain. They can't change Mother Nature.
Yeah. All right, Chief Lonnie Click, thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate it. Kind of giving us a look back and a look forward at the same time. And I know that you spent, you were also on some of these crews that went around to the 18 different, you weren't on a strike team per se, but you actually helped manage some of the resources. Is that correct?
Yeah, I run with one of the national incident management teams out of the region here in Oregon and Washington, and we had 3 deployments this year that I went on, and then I'm also a local IC on the Southeast Washington Type 3 incident management team, and we sent that team out to 6 different incidences this summer. And the Type 3 things that are small, they only last for 2, 3, or 4 days, but it's still, when you add them all together, it's a significant impact and very taxing to the labor.
Big season. Thank
Big
you.
Season.
Really appreciate your time and your effort at working to keep us safe around here. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Christine.
We're back in a moment here on Meet in the Middle.